Okay, well, let's start over this side of the room. You have a question?
Yes. I want to ask about the cheese. With hard cheese, I ate last week pumpkin. So I was very tired. And I thought of trying to do it. You know, the one time. So, yeah.
Okay, let me just repeat the question. Cheese, a lot of hard, dry cheese. She loves it, but she gets very tired afterwards. Cheese is dehydrated. There's very little enzyme activity in dry cheese. So your body has to leach enzymes out of it just like it has to do cooked food, only it doesn't have to deal with poison if it's raw and salted cheese. But it still has to leach enzymes from the body, so it's going to cause some lethargy. If you want to cut if you want to reduce the amount of cheese that you eat an equal amount of butter with it, and that will address the tiredness and fatigue, and also prevent you from becoming constipated. So a lot of people will dry up eating a lot of cheese, and they'll also eat cheese, a great deal of cheese if they don't eat butter with it. Cheese is a great sponge for absorbing poisons out of the blood and the intestines everywhere. The body will take poisons and dump them into the stomach and intestines, mainly the stomach. I ask people who are very toxic and experiencing nausea to have small amounts of that cheese to absorb those poisons. If they have the butter with it, they don't need as much cheese, because the cheese will coat the poison. And it also provides a lot of vitamin A and other enzymes that are naturally present with butter fats. So you won't get as tired. You won't eat as much.
I wish we had butter in Israel.
You what?
We don't have butter in Israel.
You don't have any butter?
Only like pasteurized butter.
You can make a run over to France.
I told them
You're all the ones in the world.
in Israel when I was there, they had the camel's milk, which was raw and unpasteurized.
That's frozen.
Oh, it's frozen. You can't go down to the place in the Negev and buy
We
it?
can.
You can definitely do that. Because I have friends in Israel who do.
What?
Go right to the source.
Yeah.
Get the milk fresh.
But butter they can't get.
Yeah, they'll get it in France. They'll ship it from France or go to France and take a big batch with them. It'll last a year in the refrigerator.
Although with the importation tax, do you guys have a problem?
Yeah.
They charge them 150%.
Yeah.
To import
You
anything.
gotta smuggle it.
Yeah. So if it's $100, they charge you $150.
Well, you just tell them, the United States has a problem with that too, over $400. So just tell them you pay much.
Yeah.
So it's $10 instead of $100.
You have a question?
Because we were discussing the cheese, and I can't have the cheese, then the fat here that I'm getting from the butter is doing the same thing. It's coating the toxins with the body.
Right, but the cheese will actually help draw toxins.
Now, because though I can't have the cheese at this
I didn't
time,
say you couldn't have it. You don't want to have a lot of it. Let's say if you had some nausea, it'd be okay for you to have the cheese, but just have an equal amount or more butter than cheese.
got it. So the nausea is a big thing now during the third week. I'm comfortable with it.
And usually it takes 1 or 2 sugar cube sized amounts. I'm not saying sugar cubes. Got it? Sugar cube sized amounts of cheese. 1 or 2, and that's all it takes to absorb the poison. Good, you have a question.
Hey, Steve. Hello. How you doing?
Hey.
Good. How are you? Good.
Traffic bad out there?
Yeah. Oh, man. It's fun.
Well, Joe, do you have a question?
I've read your book several times, and I can't find anywhere in your books where you say how much fun it is washing all the dirty canning jars and dirty canning lids.
Just
dinosaur parts, and big dinosaur parts, and on it goes. Couldn't find one place in your book where you said,
Well, you have to do that with any dish that you...
Pots and pans that you normally would have to wash.
Yeah, just think you're not scrubbing and you're not scouring.
Eat everything out of the jars. You don't have to
that's right.
do a dish or a plate.
There's millions of them.
Well, just think of all the things you'd be scrubbing if you were cooking. Take you 3-4 times longer. Plus more soap, get into your
Well, but if you were
hands.
just opening the cans and the boxes like everybody else. So you wouldn't have to do the day either.
Popping in the microwave.
Poor guys in the rubble. Can I ask you to read this?
Yeah. You didn't ask
No, you
didn't
did.
complain.
Next time.
You didn't ask a question.
I have a very sensitive bone here. I've had it for about 5 weeks now. You just touch it and it hurts. And about 15 years ago, my dentist told me because of osteoporosis that it would be a good idea for me to take sodium chloride. So I took those to, you said it's a white case statement for osteoporosis?
Did you ask what the relation?
Obviously, it's like a white or a universe.
I found not long.
Which have headaches.
I found not long after I was taking it, maybe just 5 or 6 days, my elbow started hurting, just like it's doing now. It hurts when I grab my seatbelt, it hurts to the touch, and I've been told it's inflamed, although it doesn't look inflamed to me. Could that be detoxification?
Always, anytime you have pain, it's a sign of detoxification. It's a sign of swelling. Increased circulation to the area. It has to be removing something, and then after it finishes removing it, or even while it's removing it, will rebuild at the same time. Swelling is always movement toward detoxification and healing.
You better warm it up or cool it down.
Warm, always warm it
Because
up.
my physical therapist told me to cool it down. And that has not been helpful.
That would make it worse.
Okay, I believe it.
Because it's, just think about it this way, how many athletes burn out by the time they're 35 because they're always putting ice packs on their wounds? You put an ice pack on a wound or any area that's supposed to get increased circulation, what happens? It reduces the circulation, reduces the supply of nutrients to an area, and it won't heal properly. It won't detox properly, it won't heal properly.
Put a hot water bottle. Okay, thank you.
Not on top of it, next to it. Yeah, don't put anything on top because it'll restrict circulation. You don't want to restrict circulation.
If it's
You just
right
want to
here?
create heat.
It's right here, put that.
No, you put it next to it.
Okay.
Don't put it on the flesh at all. Don't put weight on it and put it next to it.
Just one try.
Yeah, like if you go to sleep, you have the hot water bottom between your, your ribs and your eyes.
That's right.
Pain ever a cause for concern, as in, because you're feeling pain, that something's wrong, you should be putting to it?
Well, it's always good to reduce pain because the experience of pain does not make one happy nor want to live. So, but the pain is always from increased swelling, increased pressure on the nerves. If you can draw heat to the area, all of the sinew, the tendons, everything that's making everything tight and causing the swelling to create pressure, if you can get everything to relax and stretch, the pain will subside. It's like a headache. The brain's expanded. There's swelling in it. The skull doesn't expand along with it, so it creates all this pressure on the nerves in the brain. That's what a headache is. I don't care what kind of a headache it is, that's what it is. Even if I take an object and shoot it through your eye into your brain, the swelling that comes along with repairing that area, getting out the dead cells that are damaged, removing blood flowing where it doesn't normally flow, and then getting nutrients in there to heal it, is always a swelling. If you take a hot water bottle and you put it both sides of the head, the one at the top, but not lay it on top of the head or on the side, lay it on top like this, it's always next to and against, without pressure. That allows all the fissures in the brain, and all the tendons, the sinew that's holding it, expand, relax. So that the skull expands, and 80-90% of the headache goes away just with the heat. Then another way to reduce the amount of fluid is to have a concentrated nutrient flow in your blood and low water levels. So that means drinking no water at all, and relying on tomatoes with high vitamin A, just to reduce the amount of fluid in the blood, so that you don't need as much sweat, not as much water. And that way you can get rid of 90-95% of your headache, and that little bit that's left is usually not debilitating or even annoying.
The high nutrient levels, like diet, specific kinds of nutrients that would be helpful.
Well, it depends upon the situation. Cheese helps absorb, excess fluids into the stomach to draw some of the water out of the tissues. Well, in the book, I talk about the Vedic jutsu is helpful for breaking down toxins in the bloodstream so that they can leave the bloodstream. So the headache formulas that I have. All the headache formulas now, since I wrote the first book, and I'm rewriting it when I'm in Thailand next month. So it'll be published, the second edition will be published probably around June or July of next year. The paperback will probably be cheaper on my publisher. He made his first dime last month. Literally a dime. So he's finally out of the red. But in that, I'm talking about putting cream in all of the headache ones. And it helps. It works a lot better. Why exactly? I would say that probably the fats are binding with a lot of toxins, and the nerves are mainly affected by cream, not butter. So the cream has a great way of sedating and soothing the nerves.
Good question. Cod liver oil, what you call it?
Oh, there is no raw, unprocessed cod liver oil. Calls in all of them. They use solvents to purify, and that means basically kerosene. So if you normally wash your food with kerosene and you wash your butter with kerosene, then I would say go ahead and have cod liver oil. But cod liver oil, the way they used to produce it, back in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, when I used to take it was made in Norway and Japan. And those two companies pressed the oil, they never purified it, and left it cloudy and gunky and tastes just like the fish. But the oil only oils that are available now, even the ones that are least processed, use a chemical to purify it. So.
There's a price product that talks about cod liver oil.
But you can't get it the way it is back then. So just eat cod. Your question?
Yeah. Last time I was reading your first book, you were talking about, when you were working in a health food store, and you tried all these vitamins, and only like 6 seemed to work. I was actually wondering, was that before you used iridology?
No, I started using iridology in the early 70s.
Okay. Well, my question is
well, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
I studied it.
Okay.
I didn't use it very often. I would dabble with it. But after seeing the actual relationship between Susie and the IUD puncturing, when I saw that, I realized it was a fact, not just a study.
So I was wondering, when you did your research, because I know it's easy, people say, I took these vitamins and I felt better, right? To go by, how the person feels. Now, what did you use? Because you obviously didn't go by, how do I feel? what did you use to see if a person actually got better?
Well, I watched for skin tissue changes, behavioral changes. Okay, let's take Diane Cannon for She used to come in and she would buy $10,000 a month in vitamins. Most of it was vitamin E. And she used to take a bottle of vitamin E, a small bottle of vitamin E. Basically, vitamin E is from Kodak and Puma. 99% of all of the copper oil out there is from a byproduct of developing film, the chemical used to develop film. In its form, it is so toxic that they have to have very thick barrels, and when they bury it, they have to have something like 6-foot thick concrete walls in these, very expensive. They have to buy land, they have to dig, they have to do all this. Very expensive to take care of that waste. So scientists said, well, this has a molecular structure of tocopherol. D-alpha tocopherol is vitamin E, natural vitamin E. It doesn't have the D-alpha elements in that structure, but it looks 90% like a vitamin E, so they sell it as vitamin E. So they get to sell all their chemicals and make a profit from it instead of having to bury it. And basically, it's a solvent. Any pressed oil anyway is a solvent. If it doesn't come from animal fat, it's mainly a solvent, something that dissolves something in your body, a compound that dissolves the body. So all of this vitamin E that she was taking thinned her skin, frazzled her nervous system. She was a basket case, absolute basket case. I mean, her skin was smooth and great, but it was white, and you could see it was very thin, like somebody who takes too much aspirin. I mean, if I went like this, I could have torn the skin right off of her arm. And that's the way her nervous system is.
Because that's what I see the difference between what you do. Because there's a lot of people that go, yeah, take these vitamins and yeah, I feel better. But because, like I said in the book, it stimulates adrenaline rush because it's toxic. So it's the adrenaline rush that gives them the energy. Coffee does the same. Cocaine, any drug will do that. Right. But it's not a safe, happy, healthy energy, high energy. It's a toxic. So you looked at like the skin, just to see that the skin was very
skin, behavior, temperament. Same thing I found about vitamin C. Vitamin C is the same thing. It caused more anger quicker. People were taking the powdered vitamin C. They had not a clue of their behavior. They thought they were very peaceful and nice. And they'd go around chewing people's head off, being very rude, very sarcastic and wry. And when they weren't taking that, powdered vitamin C, they didn't have that behavior. And when they'd stop taking it, that behavior would stop. Okay?
You're saying it would like raise the nervous system? What was it that was creating?
The vitamin C?
Yeah.
The vitamin C in the body is used in the citric acid cycle, and that means that's how it converts fat into energy. Only 5% of that is needed in that cycle. That's maybe a couple of molecules of vitamin C. Maybe 100 molecules of vitamin C to run your entire body for the day. That's all you need. So it looks for fat. And if you're taking megadoses, what happens? It goes in and robs all of the blood fat. And then if it can't find any more fat, it goes into the glands and nervous system to pull it out. Makes lesions on the nerves. Makes lesions in the liver. Causes lots of problems. Seems to work with, and then they say, well, it works with cancer. We do these injections of vitamin C into the blood. Sure it works because it stops the development of tumors, but it tears the body apart in the process. As it lowers the blood fat level, the body can no longer transport those dead cells to that one place to hold them. It stops tumor development sometimes. But that doesn't mean it's helpful. those people just begin to generate more. And when they have no fat in their body, they're just going to destroy more cells, kill more live cells. And they're lacking fat anyway to form the right kinds of cholesterol to dissolve dead cells so they can eliminate the dead cells. They're not doing that, so they're holding on to all these dead cells, and they keep collecting. It's like prisons. We don't rehabilitate the criminals. We just stuff them in a prison, and that's basically what the body does when it doesn't have the nutrients it needs to dissolve dead cells. It stuffs them in place, called tumors. And if it's a malignant cancer, a cancer cell has a high rate of acid in it. So when it dies, it can dissolve and disappear. That's why malignant tumors can go into remission and disappear overnight. But a benign tumor can take 40, 50 years to break down and leave the body. A year, but it always takes a very long time for a benign tumor to dissolve. And you have a dissolution of this, you have cancer cells dissolving and no fat to bind with those poisons, then that gets into everything and it'll disrupt the functioning and the integrity of any cell that it comes in contact with. So it's like putting bile on your system or a battery acid. Every cell that it touches is going to be affected.
What about localized?
About what?
By localized cells, more like body instead of that's why
Well, usually the body will spread dead cells evenly throughout the body, but when it's reached its maximum and it can't do it, then it'll start building tumors.
So vitamin E is all soluble. Instead of
99% of it is really a byproduct of the film development companies. And whenever you see the natural ones, they used about 10 units of the true vitamin E corn or soybeans, and the other 90% is the actual chemical still.
That was invented, by the way, Hoffman and Roche got that idea. It was fluoride that's dumped into water.
Water, right.
Right, and they took the same idea, Hoffman and Roche,
Right.
developed that. My uncle was a vice president.
Well, where can we find your own? Is he strung up anywhere?
Retired after my aunt died of cancer, colon cancer, and he was very mad that his company, who told him that this was okay, was doing this because that was one of the brothers.
Right.
So he got upset. And they keep their old employees away
Static, absolutely.
so that they can't share them. And they learned that from the government, the nuclear radiation, and aluminum waste products.
Right.
So they're going to do the fluoride, tell everybody they need fluoride, we'll dump it in the water, and we'll get the people. And we'll pay them to do that.
Yeah, fluorocarbons are one of the worst byproducts of industry. And it's likely you cannot contain it because it will eat through those cans. And it'll just even eat through concrete. So they had to find a way and they decided to put in water systems to feed to everybody.
They have a nuclear plant up in Utah that's now being moved to Colorado. And the radiation will hit LA in the next couple of years. There's no way they can get that out yet. Their way.
That's where it's going. They're toxic. Can I close this? The sound of the air filter. The amount of vitamins, enzymes, and minerals that are necessary are very minimal. The actual need, as long as you're on a raw diet, if you're on a cooked diet, you need massive amounts of nutrients. You can never get enough nutrients unless you were doing, let's say, doing a lot of juices in between every time you ate something cooked, a lot, like corn. But I usually recommend 3 to 4 cups a day, which is far exceeds, in vitamin E, vitamin A, everything that's in the juice covers more than you need. 2 juices will cover everything you need in a day. That's why I like everybody to restore the nutrients lost over all the years of eating cooked foods, to eat more than 2 juices a day. Drink more than 2 juices a day to help build that up. All the high ones are most important, yes, that we need so much. Vitamin A, vitamin E, chlorophyll in the parsley. Parsley is full of almost everything. Right, and the celery is almost identical to human blood as far as sodium level and all other minerals, magnesium, and everything. In the water, you're only getting minerals, and the dry minerals are not ionically active. Right, and that's what we'll do in the body. Well, you not only have enzymes, you have ion activity that is associated with it, along with the enzymes. So it has to be in a form. You can take cauterized minerals. Let's say you take minerals from a volcanic ash with molten metals in it. You feed it to plants. Trees and shrubs are the only ones that can handle that and grow. Like you go to Hawaii and you see all the trees growing up there. You won't see grass, you won't see anything else coming up. Just shrubs and weeds and stuff like that. It can really grow around it, not from it. Because if you force a plant to eat the molten metals, it will kill them. And you can do an experiment by taking, the Aztec secret clay and put that in some of your plants and watch them die. Right, yeah. Fish is very concentrated. The most concentrated is shellfish, oysters. Well, that would be for practitioners, not for somebody who, people with a little knowledge. Would get dangerous. I just like to suggest food and the reasons for the food rather than break it down chemically, because people have different perspectives on how the chemistry works. And I did mine backwards. I saw it would work and then figured out why it worked. And that is just my particular perspective of why it works. Whether it actually works that way, I'm not God. I have to be able to look in and relate to all the interactivity of the organisms inside each molecule to really be able to say, this is why it works. But everybody needs bullshit. To make things rational, reasonable.
Did you get that interview?
Well, I'm going to, my next book is going to be on detoxification. I'm literally talked the publisher into giving me 2 different covers and 2 different titles. One of them will call Eat Shit and Live. You know how well that book will sell? Yeah. And everybody thinks it's going to be comedy. But it will introduce them to a whole new concept, a whole new behavior.
Which makes everything else a comedy.
Right. But I've been thinking about writing one as a comedy, the whole book as a comedy as well as a regular.
To make light of it. Make light of it.
Make light of it, but also to show people what works. You're going to buckle up. in the Thames from it. Pardon? They store, they don't detox into the muscles, they store into the muscles because you don't have enough proper nutrients, like in diabetics. Right, no, it's the old ones, stored. Pardon? Well, it's in the muscle already, or in the tendons. Detoxified. Without enough fats in the area, it causes cramp during detoxification. I mean, there are a lot of diabetics who go through it. They have hand and feet cramps, and they get amputations because the sugars keep storing in the lower part of their body and start deteriorating the system. Because the sugars collect, especially those who take insulin. Because insulin is a sterilized compound. It's not a natural. They take it from, they used to use a lot from the pig, but they would sterilize it. So it was no longer in its natural form. So when it reacted on sugars, it didn't react on them properly. It only, let's say, fractionated the sugar molecule, let's say a third, less than a third of what normally gets broken down. So it doesn't get properly used. So there's many more byproducts. Those store in the feet. That's why diabetics have such swelling on the lower parts of the body and end up getting amputations late in their life.
The adrenal flows back to the heart is so poor that so it's there. You have spaces.
Yep.
So you recommend cream for diabetics?
Lots of cleaning up. But this is on a general. If you've got somebody who's got inflammatory bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease, you can't use the cream because if you use cream with food, they won't digest it.
I can't have my favorite. I got used to it after 3 weeks, and I can't have it. That's fine. But I'll eat it separately.
How would you apply?
Couple hot water bottles. I used to use 5 hot water bottles. I put 2 between here, 2 under here, 1 here on the side, either side. Oh, yeah? Sounds great. Like those long pillows.
But what would be the difference then if
But how the hell do you feel them? Because you have to, get it under the sink.
Challenge.
You need the light right, you'd have to do it in the tub.
But you said about using the baths. Would the baths be easier for some people? Where you always talk about pain.
That's when the body was so full of pain all over. Or the pain is so excruciating, the local evil.
You get to do lower leg bath. There's bath is something to sit in it.
Right.
You mean like a mini Japanese tub?
Yeah, it's like it's good. I can sit it for
Well, for the sugar, it's usually, for sugar reaction, lactic acid is best to use local ether, not wet.
And not UV light.
No, because that alters the molecular structure of cells, and they don't regenerate cells properly, so they won't heal properly.
Right, well, they cook the fish.
Okay, since I have a little time here, I'm going to go back through again. But I want to talk about baths. A couple of people have already heard the story, but I just want to impress on people how important excess fats are to the body. When I was in North Carolina, I was a few weeks ago seeing patients, seeing a lot of people who were ex-vegetarians, 20, 25, 27 year vegetarians, very ill and very sick. Then this one man walked in who looked like he was right out of the local bar. He had all the adipose tissue, the thick nose and all of that. It goes along with drug use and alcohol abuse. And it was pretty bad, but when I photographed his eyes, his body was so clean inside. Amazing. He didn't have all the scar tissue, he didn't have all the poisons, he didn't have a lot of metal poisoning in his system. His glands were all working. And here he was only maybe 20 pounds overweight. And I was perplexed, and I said, you know, I'm in a conundrum here. You know, so I explained. He said, no, I was an alcoholic and drug user longer than you think. 27 years with the alcohol and 25 years with the drugs. I thought it was about 20, 22, maybe 25 with the alcohol. The way the skin looked around the nerve. And I said, well, you know, did you eat a lot of fat like the French do whenever you did your drugs? He said, oh, I was 300 pounds a few months ago before I started on the diet. Fat absorbs poisons. You hear it over and over again. When poisons go somewhere, they go to the fatty tissue, they go to the liver, any of the glands, wherever there's fat, it will go. And it will keep it from entering your cells and damaging your live cells. Fat is so important. So don't be skinny if you've got a problem. Don't be skinny if you have fat. And people get well quicker.
So many people are fat because they are sick.
Yes, they need it. Yep. And people ridicule them and say they're not healthy. But I'll show you how. I'll take the iridology, I'll take blood tests, everything, and show you that they're a lot healthier than anybody who's skin.
But they may be very symptomatic because they are very ill and the body knows that and see the fat on their body and everything.
To hold, because they can't discharge it. They're not on the diet to discharge it.
This statement about fat, when I was at Gerson the other way around, just get away from fat. I didn't start having my symptoms with my neck, my back, and my joints deteriorating until I was on the Gerson diet for 2.5 years. All of a sudden, I was having spontaneous fractures and ruptures and damage to the neck. Where did this come from? And it wasn't until I lost all this weight. Now that I lost all this weight, I'm still, the old diet isn't working, and I keep deteriorating further. So the fat was what was keeping me intact.
Prior to that, yeah.
Prior to that, yeah. And I got rid of the fat and started having all the others.
Because if you don't have the fat in the tissue, guess where the fat's going to go? It's going to look at the bone marrow, it's going to look at the bones, it's going to look at the nervous system, it's going to go anywhere where it can find the fat.
And there's fat around
and that means your body just starts disintegrating.
Right. And that's what it's felt like for the last 2.5 years. So what else is going to fall off now? That's what it's felt like.
And the toxins burn that tissue.
Right.
Absolutely. There's no protection. There's no fat to protect the tissues.
Remember he said I had a lot of scar tissue? Everyone has scar tissue. Everyone.
Now, if you had kept that fat on a long time ago, you'd be in a lot better shape than you is today.
Well, I think not. Brainwashed into another thought.
Version.
Or whatever.
Stuff. All of it. And Whitmore. And most people, you know, you have those few who reverse their diseases coincidentally while on that diet, but then give credit to the diet. But if, like I said in the recipe book, if 50% of the people who are doing a particular therapy don't survive, it's the bad therapy.
And by the way, every therapy, that's what my job is, has 1/3 that really work well, 1/3 that fail miserably within 12 weeks, and 1/3 that purposely will prolong life but still won't overcome the disease. And that's your diet, and there's only one other one. Came back where I haven't heard anything people die.
Well, I've had 18 people die out of about 320.
Out of 326 that I worked with, 298 on theory.
Yeah. Exactly.
Didn't you say something statistic that 60% of people who are just left alone
Yeah, we'll still
will recover?
You can take a tumor, not cancer, they don't use it in medical studies, you use a tumor. You can leave a tumor and do alternative, you can do nothing, or you can do regular chemotherapy. And the standard is that you'll have the same exact results no matter what you do. So you'll have probably better results by being left alone from the chemo and doing nothing than you would, you know.
But the rate of healing in the United States with Western medicine is something like 30%, so it goes way down.
Oh, no,
Oh,
it's less than that.
17%.
Yeah,
11 to 17%.
So it goes way down
Right.
your chances of improvement.
And we got 9 to 15% is what survived on chemotherapy. 25% is what the drug industry says. 25% is considered acceptable. And they're less than any other alternative method that you do, which is 33%. But statistics can be utilized for what you do. I do court statistics. They can be, the same statistics can be manipulated to either side. And so you got to be really careful. But the statistics were the people who were left alone lived longer than the people that did either the alternative therapy or they did the chemotherapy.
Yeah, Hardin B. Jones, he's the one who put out the report. He was the professor emeritus of medical physics and physiology at Berkeley. Hardin B. Jones, Dr. Hardin B. Jones, and he's worked with cancer for 40-some years. In the early 70s, he came out and said, okay, here's the statistics. The people who were diagnosed with cancer that I followed refused all therapies, lived an average of 12 and a half years. The people who took one or all three of the therapies lived an average of 3 years. So 76% of the cancers reverse on their own.
Because it's not
It's like a cold, it's a flu, it's just, it'll go through its process. And my understanding of it in my research, in my laboratory experiments with cancer, is that when the liver stops manufacturing certain cholesterol that dissolve dead cells, it's like, we cremate cells, dead people. The body dissolves these dead cells, and if it can't dissolve them, it mummifies them and just stores them in the body. If it stores them evenly, it can't do it anymore, then it stores them in the form of tumor. If it can't do that, and it's not squamous, what's the other one? Basal cell cancer, your body will just dissolve. Just start dissolving the cells right there on your system.
Well, skin's the largest organ anyway.
Yes.
So, and it has a real massive exit point.
Yep.
If you look at that, we don't have to bother with olive oil.
Olive oil is a solvent. It's not a protective fat. It'll help dissolve things. It will dry you out. You can't. There's nothing that will substitute the butter. You have to go to France and get it. Smuggle it in, whatever you have to do. We used to bootleg all of our dairy into Los Angeles County. Pasteurized is better than no butter, but still.
It's like getting shipped in from
Rules and regulations don't do that. Besides, you think we don't have stringent crossing borders, but when they go into Israel, they check everything. The other thing was we used to go to Lebanon before the war. Before Syria.
What you could do is probably, take empty containers of pasteurized butter, and put the raw butter in it. Probably get it through that. You don't have to smuggle it. It's
not allowed.
See, they're like California. They're very agricultural country, and they protect everything that comes
right.
Even if it's in a plastic container?
Yeah, they stop everything. People don't, they take your socks.
You have a banana in your bag, don't take it away.
So you may have to live in France for a while.
Just get a cow.
You get your own cow.
No,
That's the way to do it.
The rent a cow.
We wanted to get cheap.
Goats, you will not get good butter from the goat. And also, you're too thin. The difference between, the effects between goat's milk and cow's milk are very different. The goat's milk has precursors for high adrenaline production. That's why goats are so hyperactive and they consume. I mean, they will eat their fence. They will eat anything that, they'll eat the dirt. They will eat anything that they can get their teeth into, unless they have lots of pasture to move around and eat twice as much as a cow. Hyperactive. And if you give that to a child or a person who isn't lethargic, it's not a good idea because it will make them produce more hormones and have more hyperactivity. Be more angry, be more unsettled. So cow's milk is the best, for that. Unless you have somebody who's very overweight and lethargic, then that's when I recommend goat's milk. And, you're too thin.
I'm double the weight that I was when I was double. I was 37 kilos.
Wow.
I was 65.
Well, what about mother's milk? We talk about eating fecal. What about mother's milk? There are actually the breast milk groups where they pump the breast milk down. If breast milk is supposed to have to go, are we going to have to go to organic women to find organic mother's milk?
Well, it would probably be a great market if you have,
Yeah.
those mammary glands don't produce a lot of milk in humans. That's why they got cows. Huge udders, you know. I mean, we used to, out at my grandparents' farm, they shipped over these cows that were as big as war horses from England. They were prize breed jerseys. And I mean, my father, when he was 3 years old, about this tall, came up to just the meat on these cows. And these cows would produce each one 22 gallons of milk. Can you imagine the cow that ate? But they were huge, huge cows that ate a tremendous amount of food. But they're great producers. That's what we're looking for. These little breasts are not producing much.
But the Walechi, you know how milk, in most farms, they pool milk. In the Walechi League, they pool breast milk. So you'd actually have to go to the Walechi League in the local area. And if the woman was healthy,
If she were,
yeah.
do you know any women that are healthy? Unless you go to the Maasai tribe, some do.
I haven't found, so.
That's what I mean. I don't know a human that I'd ever eat. I never met one.
Except your mom, if you were breastfed at the time, was having those cows feed her, right?
No, she went dry to that's complete rejection.
Just trying to get you details.
I mean, that's a great idea, but it's not going to happen.
It's easier to do the poop than it is the...
Absolutely.
Actually,
Keep going back to you should live.
Yeah. Now, okay, then, you told me I couldn't go on either the high meat or the fecal material, yet because my body wasn't strong.
Your intestines are too
They
thin.
would tolerate the thing. You'd actually need the tissue. So, for the average person, though, would be, well, if there's such a thing, if they weren't clinically symptomatic, long before they have lots of them, can the average person without all the symptoms, like Steve doesn't have any symptom picture, could he go on high meat?
Absolutely.
All right.
I have clients who eat high meat and fecal matter every day. They get high on it.
But they got to a point. They got to a point where they couldn't eat.
No, they went right into it.
Or
Right
They
into
were
it.
skinny?
No,
what does it do for them?
a few of them. Pardon? Yeah, but I mean, I'm saying that the people that I know that eat it every day are not thin. They're not skinny. They're not as thin as Steve.
if you're starting a diet and you're thin, you'll probably lose weight more.
No, I'm not saying that. It's just I'm saying that there are lots of people who are thin and go right into eating the high meat. Lots of people eat the high meat, but I'm talking about on a daily basis.
All right. Oh, yeah.
Fecal matter
In your
and
book
high
it says
meat.
3 or 4 days, every 3 or 4 days. But these people are eating
Every day.
Right.
They're not underweight.
They're overweight.
We're so sterile in our environment, we don't have enough bacteria to help us detoxify. Bacteria like the crows and the vultures, they come and eat up dead tissue. They get rid of that kind of thing. With our pollutants in the bodies, our soaps and our gases and our heavy metals, all the environmental pollution is creating a system, a sterile system of bacteria. So they don't help us remove all this waste product in the system. So our bodies have to use solvents, virus. Viruses are not alive, not like bacteria, and they're not like parasites. The virus is a protein synthesized by the body. It's not contagious. The medical system can make huge assumptions that people believe, but there's no evidence anywhere. There's plenty of evidence to prove that viruses are not contagious. They replicate because the body produces it. It's like saying, we got 80% of the households in the United States have Tide. That's like saying Tide is contagious. Tide is not contagious. It's produced. It's a solvent produced to clean, just like the body produces solvents in the form of virus to break down dead tissue that is so toxic that bacteria and parasites will no longer eat, kill them, destroy them.
Yeah, there's a problem with that. You say the virus is not produced when study after study shows that the virus, when it is in the organism, finds a way to co-opt the genetic production.
Only when it's spiked, injected.
There are viruses that you can't trace going from organism to organism without a species population where it's not.
Okay, no, that's the body producing it. Let's say, back in the old days, every household made their own coconut soap. It's produced in that household. It's produced in the body. It's not produced because it's contagious. It's like me calling your hormones that you develop contagious. It's insane.
How do you explain a bloom of a virus in a population? Why that coincidental production?
Okay, I used the term in the book, bears. Are bears contagious? Because in a particular climate, they will come out at a specific time. Like the bears who come out of hibernation in the North Pole come out way later than the ones who come out in the northern United States. But they all come out about the same time. That doesn't mean that they're contagious.
Why do you suddenly have a SARS, whatever, here in this area, and suddenly, black cold?
That's all. As far as I know, the SARS was a plot. Because I knew 5 doctors who went over there, 5 of them, and they saw 210 of those supposed 268 people who were infected, and they didn't find not one of those. What were those? They were calling it a problem. They didn't find one of those in their blood or in their system anywhere. The particular thing that they were saying was.
Let's take a look. You're in a room with somebody who's got the flu. They sneeze, it's in your direction. 3 days later, average incubation period, starts showing symptoms.
That's again, you're assuming there's a 3-day incubation period.
All right, let's 3 days later, you start showing symptoms. Okay. What is the cause of the coincidental bloom of the virus if it's not a conveyance of the infected organism?
It has to do with the climate. Your body produces virus to help degenerate certain kinds of elements. We all produce it under the same. If we produced all of the virus to break down all types of tissue at once, we'd all be dead. It doesn't. It doesn't. All it does is if you isolate anybody, it has its cycle. The virus will be produced. Once it's done its job, the body will no longer produce it. You can wait out anything. If virus were contagious, why doesn't everybody get it?
Because I'm just telling you what we've been told, that because some organisms are more capable of antibodies.
That's the theory. There is no proof on that. If a virus is not alive, and they admit it's protein fragments, it's a structure, it's not alive. It's not like bacteria. They can point at bacteria and make that argument.
The definition of what is or isn't alive is a matter of great,
But the virus does not reproduce. It replicates. In other words, the body forms it. And that's very provable.
I think the definition of life is not a hard fact. You've got a protein that reproduces itself by using something.
It doesn't reproduce, it replicates. There's a difference. If you have a cell that divides and reproduces, there's a gestation period. But the body can form a solvent like that. It can manifest it instantly.
I don't understand the difference that you're making between reproduction and
reproduction takes time. It's a process of growing and multiplying. It's a process of growing and multiplying.
But the
If you have a
red
fetus, you start off with one cell. It grows and it becomes trillions of cells by the time it's manifested.
Okay, a virus goes into an organism, it co-opts the reproductive system of the nucleus, and all of a sudden you've got thousands of copies of it. What's the difference?
It's like the difference between me making soap and having a baby. Night and day.
What's the
It's a
definition of
different-
replicating?
Replicating means there's no developmental process. There's no growing process. It manifests instantly. It's like I take the chemicals here and I put them together and I've got the product, the end product, the instrument. There's no gestation.
But I think the answer is coming from, you know this, not. If you put 10 people under the virus there, if you put 10 people in the room and you spread that so-called spreading virus, there's always going to be somebody who's quote immune to that. People on this diet have a higher immune system, so they don't form either, whether you call it replication or duplication, they aren't going to reproduce this virus. It can't trigger
Not
a
true.
response.
Not true.
Yeah, but as far as he understands it, your way of explaining to him doesn't get any other information. And you can alter that belief pattern a little bit.
No, but what I'm saying is that our bodies produce the same viruses. It's just that we don't have the same intense symptoms.
Okay, so
People on this diet go to work with flus, with pneumonia. The only thing that I've seen debilitate people to where they can't go to work is meningitis, whether it's cerebral or spinal meningitis.
So in other words, you're saying everybody will get that same virus, but it depends on how that person responds to the production of that virus. But it's
I
symptomatic.
think what he's saying is that nobody gets the virus, they make it themselves.
Yeah, but it's in response to
coincidentally
what?
in time.
But it's in response to something.
It's in response to climatic and cycles.
So this
It's
particular
like the lemmings. Every 7 years they reproduce to a point where they cannot live anymore because there are too many of them. So they run off of the cliff. Every year, same month. Every 7 years, same month, they'll do it. What causes them to do it?
A really bad version of Jay Leno.
That's it.
Yeah, but viruses
Yeah.
again start coming in because of the environment we've destroyed and the fact there are too many of us, and it's our own way of breaking down the society.
Well, like I say, in my laboratory experiments, viruses are produced mainly in the liver. It's a chemical structure that can be manifest instantly. There's no reproductive value to it. There's no gestation period. It's manifest instantly. If the body manifested all of them all at the same time and it didn't have some kind of cooperative going on with nature, well, let's say the body will form virus, this type of virus, this type of tissue. So it has to do with temperature, climatic temperature, year, cycle, whatever it is. It seems to be pretty in tune because otherwise, if they all happen instantaneously, we'd all be dead.
Well, everything you've said so far has been intriguing as a new way of looking at things, but the idea that there's no such thing as contagion, I gotta say I'm skeptical about that.
It's okay.
And I haven't heard a convincing argument otherwise.
There's a lot of material out there about it.
Yeah,
Lisa was talking about
homeopathy is a great springboard for research.
There's several theories going on the theory first.
Right? There's a
Caroline theory,
What is that group in Germany?
There's also another book, What Do You Think? If everything you knew about AIDS or HIV was incorrect. The lady who writes it has HIV, and she was supposed to be dead a long time ago. She's in LA.
I know.
Yeah, and you'll read through it, and it flips everything you've been told upside down. Now, a lot of the theories were suppressed. The people that wrote the original book 25 years ago about AIDS, when it was beginning to be notified or noticed, was suppressed because it's actually been a created type of thing. Some of these things have been
Well,
manufactured.
let's take that example. Is there a case of anyone who has HIV who did not come into contact with someone and who was HIV positive?
Yes.
Absolutely.
That one of the first ones that they had in 1976 that they have in they sliced up the kid after he died. Autopsy. They still have You know, where did he get this? He had no contact. He wasn't gay. He was a 15-year-old kid. He didn't have any of the drug use. Didn't have any of this stuff.
So there was no identifiable
Nothing
vector.
they could-
However, Dr. Strecker, who is 5 doctorates, was hired by an insurance company in San Francisco that was asked to insure the employees and of this one company that was just purchased by another company. 60% of their employees were homosexual. So they wanted to know the insurance company sell. And it kept dividing instead of fractionating into 5 parts, as they normally do. So after 1,000 of them, he said, wait a minute, this is a man's spliced problem. So he went and put the opposite ends together, you know, in one night, and within a week he had the answer. He had the lymphonomic disease of a sheep and the leukemic disease of a cow, and they were spliced together. So he took the 2 names of those 2 diseases and was going to go to 5 universities to see who developed it. And he happened to be in Los Angeles at the time, went to UCLA, and he put the name of the disease in 15 different configurations, and probably you would call it that. The first name popped up in UCLA, and they invented it in 1961 to cause cancer in animals to study cancer. So he called his brother, who was an attorney, a famous attorney, and he said, okay, I need you to search this out. It was given to the War Department put it in, and it's all documented. All the people who were involved in letting this information out, putting in a book called Bioattack Alert, were all dead within 3 months.
They claimed it was a drug abuse or overuse. The guy never had drugs.
They never had drugs.
But now we're talking about a research project that creates a weapon of hate.
No, it has to be injected. Like I said, spiked. It has to be given to the body.
Right.
Has to poison the body.
And it could be
What's
sexually,
the
it could be...
difference between injection and transfer of a potent amount of it in some other way?
A virus, a bacteria, a disease that naturally replicates has an address with some kind of cycle. When you start crossbreeding them, it loses it, because when you're splicing them, it loses half of its natural knowledge.
So if I have a virus, you took it out of my blood and you injected it to somebody else, that person could develop the same.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what's the difference between that injection as a form of the contagious vector and if I kiss them and inject them with my saliva that has the same potent vector?
Okay, that's like saying, if you kiss that wall, are you going to get the other side of the wall infected? You have to understand, you have 5 layers of tissue in all mucous membranes, 5 layers of tissue minimum, plus you have a mucous coating, plus you have trillions of white blood cells there to attack whatever comes through there.
If those defenses fail,
But if you do that to a tissue, you never see it happen. I did it 200 times in the laboratory, and not once did I see one of those bacteria survive. Not one survived out of 200 laboratory tests. That series of tests cost me $118,000 to do. Not one survived. Not one survived. Syphilis we used. We also used smallpox and what's the one he wanted to use? Meningitis. Not one of them passed through that membrane to survive. So the only way you can do it is to spike it. And we were able to do it by spiking.
well, it simply says room for much study.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of assumption that goes on. But a Dr. Wu, I think his name was, from Irvine, he retired a few years ago. He did a paper on the ability for AIDS to develop to transfer from tissue to get through the mucous membranes, to get through the membrane tissue itself. He said it's 5 million to 1. 1 in 5 million chance, which is basically impossible, an impossibility. I have the 38 paper that he did on it.
So there's another
Relatively
mechanism.
impossible.
There's another mechanism. We're not aware of it. They're saying one thing, it's something completely different.
Well, you have to understand that I worked with quite a few AIDS people in the early 80s. Every one of them had the hepatitis B vaccine, which is where that attorney found that it was put in the hepatitis B vaccine. They wanted to explore giving bacterial warfare. And the military wanted to test it, so they thought the most expendable people would be homosexuals. And they knew that 90% of the homosexual polyp, 90% of the people who were getting hepatitis in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were drug users. And most of them were homosexuals. 90% of them were homosexuals. 90% of the people who got the hepatitis B vaccine were homosexuals. The other 10%, which is what we hear, is in the heterosexual community, got that AIDS. But again, it was from the hepatitis B vaccine. The British reporter who found that all 75 million people who got the AIDS had gotten the smallpox vaccine in Africa. They were used to destroy that culture there to get control of their government, because they came to our government and the British government for money for this big disease that all of a sudden took over the country right after all these vaccines. But nobody puts the two together until this one British reporter did. And he investigated and found, yes, the vials of smallpox vaccine were infected with AIDS. So they had been given to all these people. But what they did was cause the governments to become bankrupt and run by the world government. I mean, the world banks. Just a matter of economy. It's just one way. It's another warfare to destroy and take over the assets of the country.
If you were going to do that, we could go after countries that had assets.
They've got oil there, and they've got all kinds of jewel mines in those countries. They've got phenomenal assets.
Yeah.
Gold.
Yeah.
It's heavy there,
And they
yeah.
have a lot of mouths to feed, and they have no people to feed them, and it's cheaper to get rid of them than it is to...
And to take over their country, to get all their resources. No, you have to go to unusual places.
Another book to read is The Biological Apocalypse by...
Yes, Leonard.
Yeah. And he talks about the use of that to depopulate the planet, because we have 10 billion people. We only can support 1 billion.
So we don't need to be fearful of biological attack of smallpox.
No, you
Just
don't.
vaccines for it.
Vaccines for it, exactly.
No, but breast cancer, for instance, breast cancer is in larger amounts than ever before. And breast cancer is not only in the United States, it's in all Western countries. Western Europe, all the Western countries have more breast cancer than they've ever seen before. So it's a way to depopulate the Western countries as well as the Eastern.
I mean, you take a look at it. You've got the University of Toronto dissolving human brains in 7 days. There's vessels going to it. Why isn't it on the market? Why isn't everybody eating shit?
They won't
let it out. The first one that they're letting out is by Bion Products. They just patented it and they put it up for the FDA's review. And they've taken salmonella that Yale used. They used salmonella to choke off the oxygen to a tumor and then eat it up. That's what salmonella does. It eats up dead tissue. But it mostly lives on the skin. It eats your dead tissue. If you didn't take baths, you'd be covered and coated with salmonella like all animals do, because it eats the skin, dead skin cells. That's what salmonella does. It's a janitor of the skin. And sometimes nose tissue, but it's still all exposed, directly exposed to air. They attenuated the salmonella so it still chokes off the oxygen to the tumor, but it won't eat it up. So they charge you they're planning to charge $8,000 for one injection of this attenuated salmonella, and then charge you $12,000 for an injection of a man-made solvent to dissolve the tumor. $20,000 a treatment. Eat shit and live. Eat rotten chicken. Eat all that to get your bacteria, and then you don't have to worry. You're not spending $20,000 a treatment.
See, but they can't patent shipping.
Exactly.
They can't patent
That's
shipping.
right.
The law says if they can't patent it, then in nature they can't duplicate it. But if you eliminate people from getting it in nature, then they have to come to the source that recreates it.
And they have to attenuate the salmonella so they can patent it.
Right. And so it's altered what is natural in the environment.
Exactly.
the new time change, sleep schedules, do you have any recommendations for cycles or?
I don't follow any cycle.
You don't
I
sleep.
sleep when I'm tired. Well, I sleep 3.5 to 4 hours a day.
Were you like that at the first, or was it until you got through all the time?
Oh no! As I got healthier, the less sleep I need. And I enjoy it because I love being. I was so unproductive my whole life. I couldn't even play with other children.
So how long did it take you? 3-4 years before you began to have less sleep?
Well, it was progressive. Yeah, it was. You know, I mean, I was sleeping 16 to 18 hours a day. You know, even longer with the blood and bone cancer and all of that. Then I got well, and after the poison mushroom, I was again sleeping, 20 hours a day, 18, 20 hours a day. And, progressively, as I get well, I get less and less sleep. 5 years ago, I was sleeping 5.5 to 6 hours a day. Now I'm down to 3.5, 4 hours a day.
Last night.
I had 2 hours sleep last night, and I had 2 naps here that were about a half an hour each.
Do you ever look into like optimal?
Optimum what?
Like test pads or?
Yeah, I experimented with those too. Spent a lot of money on that. How much it cost to have, custom-made beds done?
Well, I was looking at
$6,000. I've had about 8 of them made.
Really?
Yeah.
Made it one?
Well, I tried different products.
Yeah.
But the ones I found best were I would have futons made of specially combed, about 90% cotton and wool. And if you have them combined, they will fluff a little bit better. So there are all in the state of California. You have to have borax in it unless you have a doctor's permission. Not to, because you have an allergy to the borax. It's an anti-inflammatory, inflammable. So I got a doctor to make a thing said I'm allergic to it, so I got them to make a futon for me that did not have any borax in it. That was made the structure that I wanted to with the fibers that I wanted to, which was the wool, 10% wool, 90% organic cotton, and the covers are all synthetic material.
It's formaldehyde.
And sheets too, right? So, but that's the sizing. Once you wash it 2-3 times, that's out. Except in the fibers, if you inhale those fibers, you might get a little of that product in your lungs. That's why I don't like to use any synthetic clothing. You're basically breathing plastic. And when you dissolve plastic in the lungs, you're setting yourself up for cancer. The amount of cancer that's going to come in the next 20 years in the lungs is going to be astounding.
From the synthetic
Synthetic fibers that have come out in the last 10 years.
That's the number one cause for breast cancer is red mass.
What about airbags? When you push a button and it goes off and
You're dealing with a plastic cover. If you could have it made from rubber, that would be okay. But they're so easily punctured. So are the plastic ones. I got one once that I was experimenting with it, and I barely bumped it into something that wasn't that sharp and popped a hole in it instantly.
Our engineer knows a company that doesn't have a borax and run it to their specifications.
They can only legally do it if there's a doctor's.
Not a problem, we got the doctors. We got a whole lot of doctors, I think. 1,300.
So what was the upshot of all this research on betting? What did you find out?
Yeah.
Well, I found out. I like the mixture of 90% organic cotton and 10% organic wool.
Now, is that because it's more comfortable, or is it because you're not
It
inhaling?
it floats better. You're always going to inhale no matter what you're sleeping on.
Yeah.
Anything you sleep on degenerates. Wearing clothes, you wash it and you put it through the dryer, you know how much lint you get?
Yeah.
That's how much you get into your system all the time. If you're breathing something that's natural that your body can dissolve without BPAs and dioxins in them, then you're going to be healthier. But if you have all these plastics and BPA and dioxins and phthalates in the material, that's going to be part of your lungs. Plastic in your lungs, everything.
What about
Everything.
cadmium and all those other metals?
Yeah. Everything. They're all
Yeah.
plastic.
So we should just look for natural.
Silk, wool, cotton.
And the Sikh community down there, the Hare Krishnas,
Rayon
have a
is
lot,
made
there's a lot
from
of stores for this.
rayon is made from pine needles, but once they finish treating it and they use a glue in it, it's basically plastic. So it's
The Indian rayon?
even the Indian rayon.
But
It's all a misnomer. It's all from natural.
but
The
that's
cotton, all they do is weave and clean, and the wool and the silk, it's all just cleaning. But when you take and make a fiber from pine needles, you have to break it down. You have to make it into a plastic.
Or like brownies?
All of them are plastic. Vegetable oil. That's what happened. That's how we found out about plastic. Somebody was working in a factory, and they were processing and hydrogenating the vegetable oils. He fell asleep. It went too long. He ended up with plastic.
His name is DuPont.
No, he was the employee of DuPont. DuPont turned around and made a fortune with it. It didn't pay that guy anything.
Yeah, you're right.
What did you say in there when something about earth and vegetable oils made something and earth and animal oils?
If you take vegetable oils and you mix it with dirt, it'll turn into rock. It turns rock hard.
Oh, yeah.
If you take animal fats and put them in dirt, it'll mold and break down and become earth. Your amber stone is the resin from a tree. A lot of stones are from fats from trees. That's what happens to vegetable oil. It's very hard and impossible for the human body to break it down. That's what's causing all the hardening of the arteries. Olive oil is not a vegetable. Olive oil is a fruit. But it's still a solvent. It will dissolve things. It doesn't build and protect like butter and cream does.
So like one of the recipes is pour some olive oil on the steak or whatever, and some seasoning. Is that going to be bad?
That's bad for somebody who has Crohn's disease or any kind of psoriasis.
What about like Korean?
I think it would help dissolve some of the toxicity in your body, but I wouldn't have it more than once every 5 meals. For other people, they could have it as often as every 3 meals. Depends upon your body. If you're very thin and dry, stay away from them until you put on the weight, so you stop having your internal dryness.
In the beginning it was okay, but I didn't know whether...
Well, usually when there's pregnancy, there's a lot of discard of poisons, and it makes the blood very acidic. And that causes repulsion to meat. Also, people eat a lot of fruit over-alkalinize their intestines, and that causes a repulsion to meats because your intestines have to be acid to digest meat, or else it will cause repulsion. That's why I tell people not to eat any fruit in the morning. Eat it in the afternoon if the body is already built up and utilized, pyruvate as a brain fuel rather than carbs. It doesn't create that. So what I do suggest is you should stay away from fruits the rest of the time she's pregnant, except in the afternoon with lots of fat. And if she has a problem with the detoxification, because morning sickness comes with most pregnancies in this day and age, well, that is repulsion to meat is part of that. It's a low grade.
Like if it's a little bit rare, if I make it for a little bit, then it's fine.
How bad is it like this?
Oh, it's less bad than having the whole thing cooked.
Yeah, I know.
But you still have lipid peroxides and acrylamides and advanced glycation end products and what's the other one? Yeah, there's 20 of them, but there's 4 main ones. Anyway, the lipid peroxides, they all form in that amount that you cook. So that degrades your health and, of course, the baby's health for that amount.
So, I mean,
It's best just to wash it down with milk or with a moisturizing form. Wash it down. 40 of my healthiest clients are people who, if they eat the meat, they have to chew it. They cannot swallow without chewing it. And they chew it so much they can only get a half a cup down. But what I said to do is just wash it down with milk, not room temperature milk, or moisturizing or lubrication form.
Take it like a pill.
Right. When you take it like that, they eat 1 to 3 pounds and they get healthier. They are healthier faster than any of my other clients.
That's good. It's good for eating like a little bit rarer meat than not eat at all?
Correct. Yeah, it's definitely what it is. But it's better to just wash it down raw.
You don't have to chew it. You don't want to.
You don't have to chew it.
Right. You have to chew it, swallow it.
And the chlorophyll of meat, like it can only get frozen from Argentina and that's true.
You won't regenerate cells with it. You can use it as fuel, but that's expensive fuel. What happens when something's frozen? Once it becomes room temperature, it just dissolves. That's it decomposes. That is, it's all the bacteria, all of the sugars, everything is in fermentation state and degeneration. Something calls.
Your view on candida is very different than others, but is there modification of diet where not sugar it down
more of the fats, because the candida feeds on sugar injured cells. So wherever you have acrylamides, advanced glycation end products, and poorly formed or utilized sugar byproducts in those cells, that's what candida feeds on. It's a good thing, because with all the sugar we've had in the last 100 years, if we didn't have candida, everybody would have psoriasis or eczema or skin cancer.
So you're saying it's again a detoxification?
Absolutely. There are helpers. And what I was going with before was that if you can't sustain a yeast like candida, a mold, or you can't sustain a bacteria or a virus in your body because you're too polluted and too sterile, your body has to use virus. It has to use solvents to dissolve everything. It's like I make a soap and I put diluted water and I have to wash everything. I've got this whole pail of garbage, of toxin in this water that if I dump it, it's going to spread over everything. When a virus or a parasite eats something, it takes a mass volume and reduces it to a turd, some kind of excretion. It's like we made 7 to 10 pounds a day and put out a fecal matter that's less than a pound. So we've taken all this food and reduced it. That's what that's what bacteria and parasites do. Viruses do not. They don't consume. They just break down and disintegrate like a soap, which is a proof that it is a solvent and not a live thing and doesn't replicate itself, because we can see them form mainly in the liver and fatty tissue. So if you have that problem, you don't have the help of bacteria and parasites, then eating them should make the body happy. That's why when I was with the Eskimos and I saw them eating this smelly shit that made me want to puke within 5 feet of it, they would be children and the adults, because they only do it once a year, and they eat a massive amount of it. Jump up and down. This stuff stinks for a half a mile. It's terrible. It's horrendous. It's high meat. The meat that they buried in the ground, it's mold high. They call it high meat.
Bacterial events, any kind of.
Whatever kind of meat that they
Could have been fish, it could have been
seal.
No.
No, they do this in the summertime. They bury it about late spring, and then they dig it up about midsummer, and then they eat it. When I was there, they had seal and caribou.
But that's what Roblox was buried salmon.
So
increase the cream and the honey, or more like the honey?
Well, the honey can cause the sugar byproducts to detoxify, and that gives the yeast, the molds, the candida, more to feed on. So that can cause more dryness as it comes to the skin. If you do that, then use the Primal Facial Body Care Cream on page 145 of the book on your skin, everywhere. Then you can handle that kind of detox without many symptoms. And eat your moisturizing formula and some cream to help the internal body be coated too, so you don't have internal symptoms that go along with the nervousness and
Okay, add these more so, but the rest of the diet pretty much, say maybe a little more cream, but then adding these.
You haven't seen him though yet as a patient.
No.
The one thing I was making a misnomer. I read the book, followed the instructions, but the thing is, he told me I was doing it all wrong because I
For your
ignored
condition,
for
for
his
you.
system.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe yours would be a little bit
I'm
more.
going to do a research, I'll find out, but
Thank you. My main question, I think I'm excited and going to auxiliary to his question. I think my main one. It's about the liver. Like they say on the standard American diet that probably 50% of our livers, the standard, is not working optimally. And so then you go on your diet and you're putting in like up to a pound of meat a day. Can you talk about how, if that is or isn't
What does liver have to do with meat?
Processing it.
Liver doesn't process protein, it
fat?
processes fat.
Okay, oh, so maybe it's the fat, then I should be concerned about that.
Well, you shouldn't be concerned
The
about
level
any
of
of it.
fat?
Remember when I destroyed 90% of my liver by eating the poison mushroom? I forced myself to eat 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of butter a day to force the liver to work.
So you don't want to rest it. You want to make
Yeah,
it
you've got
work.
it. And just remember, your liver's your ticket to life and health.
Right, that's what I'm
Without the
concerned.
fat, you will not survive.
Right.
In
Okay.
this toxic environment.
Yeah, no, and especially if you're dealing with a serious disease, you want to
Absolutely.
get the liver working
The liver
as
has
soon as
to work.
possible. So the other thing that comes up a lot is you hear a lot about various types of enemas and liver cleanses and all these things to clear out these organs that aren't working so well. And I know I've heard you don't support that, but can you talk more about why you don't, and or if there's any situations that you would support some sort of like from how people describe them, for cleanses and enemas, or like some sort of speed direction to healing.
What makes you think they speed it?
I don't. I'm just going to say
Yeah,
that.
that's what
It's
they're
clearing
going
it
on
out.
assumption.
Okay.
But I've never seen the liver work better after one of those. In fact, it usually causes severe mineral loss. They start breaking down their teeth, their bones everywhere in the body when you start using lemon and vinegar in that way. You rip out the E. coli from the intestines as well as all the other bacteria in the bowels. So you completely eliminate for at least 45 days the ability to synthesize your own amino acids and B vitamins, which is basically a backup system for the body. That bowel is very, very important. So I haven't found any of them to work. It's all, people get a high because they get all this adrenaline rush when you fill the body with, citric acid like that when you put in lemon juice in the body. And you're throwing, coffee into the bowel. I beg your pardon, wait a minute, you're throwing caffeine right into the bloodstream instantly. You're going to have an adrenaline reaction. Sure, you're going to feel high, but that's no better than cocaine, snorting cocaine to the bowel. Those aren't healthy ways to get the body to feel more energetic. They're damaging.
So back to the basics, getting the organs functioning as high as possible, and the more fat that you can take in, the more fat. Good fat.
Avocado is a fruit fat, but in my observations of it over about 15 years, I lived on 7 of them a day when I was a fruitarian. I'm sure I would have died without them. But they're very difficult for the liver. They have to go through the liver has to go through a complex system to break it down, to utilize it for anything other than soap and fuel. So it doesn't really protect the body like animal fats do. They'll help a little bit.
How long do you recommend only breastfeeding and once you start giving food?
I have my kids, kids that are born on the diet, they'll start eating meat at 3 months old. Nibbling on it, sucking on it, getting the blood out of it, and by 6 months old they're eating it. I got one baby, Forrest, and he wouldn't eat the meat unless it was just on the grass. This kid wasn't a year old, and he would only eat if it was on the grass. He wanted that bacteria, whatever was in that soil.
For 3 months only?
I got pictures of him.
For the first 3 months only lactating?
Yeah. But, you know, I think that theoretically, all the tribes feed their children, all the raw food tribes feed nurse for 4 years.
Right. And eggs, milk,
All that stuff.
My nutrition friend said, this guy's crazy when she read the milkshake for babies, cow's milk for babies. He said, no way, the absorption just isn't worth
That's
it.
pasteurized.
She's speaking of pasteurized as well.
And raw diet, RDs don't know a darn thing about raw organic. They don't know anything about organic.
Yeah, yeah. How about she was saying to the hair falling out with a lot of raw eggs? Do some people have to cut more back? Only I think I was but I think I may be seeing more. No, I think I may be seeing more hair coming out with dark than doing it, but I'm not sure. I just wanted to check.
But
how many
there are millions of people that have hair loss that aren't on this diet, and they're losing it frightfully fast. I've always found that hair loss accompanies a great deal of mercury, cadmium, or lead being built into the hair. So it damages the follicles as it passes from the brain to the bone into the follicle, because that's the way our body gets rid of toxic metals the easiest, building into hair and nails. Sometimes skin. People who have massive detoxifications like psoriasis, you lose your hair.
Well, should one cut down a bit or keep it up?
It's got nothing to do with the diet.
Yeah.
There's a lower rate of hair loss on this diet, just as there's a lower rate of vomiting, and I gave you the book, vomiting and diarrhea on this diet than there is on any other diet.
Wouldn't get one more the big one soothing of that passage of the toxins?
Oh, absolutely. The moisturizing form, if you're drinking, it's going to get to everywhere. But if you're eating butter in any other form without the lemon juice and the honey and the eggs with it, it doesn't get to the skin and joints properly.
That might
So
help
that
them,
is
yeah.
correct. Yeah. And you could
I
take
think I'm seeing more hair come out.
you could take the Primal Facial Body Care Cream that's in the recipe book and rub that into the scalp, and that will also protect it directly.
Okay.
So you can feed the skin directly.
Is it better?
That's it, folks. Go ahead, Steve.
Is it better like the Primal Facial as it gets just like the meat would be better? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It
but
gets kind of stinky after a couple months.
well, if you use after a couple months,
Yeah.
yes, definitely. If you use more, like I call for 1 teaspoon of ginger and 1 teaspoon of lime juice,
Yeah.
I've had it up to 5 times the amount of ginger and 2 to 3 times the amount of lime juice,
Okay.
and it stays fresher longer, but it does turn into more of a solvent.
Okay.
So if you have calloused areas that are very dry, it'll help soften and moisturize that area, to help degenerate it. But then it becomes more of or partially solvent reactive than medicinal and protective.
Right. So older is fine. Though.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you have very sensitive tissue, don't put it on that area.
We have 5.
Okay. Put the meat in your mouth and wash it down with milk. Yeah. No tribe chews their meat. Eskimos do the most chewing, and they'll chew it twice just to crush it and get it swallowed.
So it seems like maybe because we were eating so much food and like we take the fiber of the meat out. You know, we just chew it really good and then make the fiber of the meat.
Don't even. You want the fiber.
So just like
Swallow. Yeah. Because if you keep chewing it there, you're going to get over acid and you're going to get repulsive meat. No tribe chews their meat. They crush it just to be able to swallow it. They rip it, swallow it, just like dogs and cats do. None of them chew their meat. They rip and swallow.
you do the same.
Except for Eskimos, like you say, if it's frozen, they have to chew it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times to be able to swallow it.
Is that how you
Crush it.
Is that how you do it?
Oh yeah, I just rip it and swallow it. Or I grind in the food processor
And then
and
just without
swallow it.
hardly any chewing at all.
Yeah, I don't. Let's chew it. I'll rip. You saw, well, I don't know if you saw me there with big chunks of meat. I just sat there with my fingers and ripping it and swallowed it.
Frozen liver is okay frozen as well? Nothing frozen.
The Eskimos, that's why they live a short life compared to other tribes that eat raw meat because they eat so much frozen meat. they live the same lifespan we have. The oldest is about 110 years old. Other tribes live 140, 150 years old.
Really, which tribe?
The Maasai, the Samburu, and Fulani. The Fulani less because they live almost entirely on raw milk. For some reason, they don't have a long lifespan. Okay, folks.
So those who want the mini sessions can line up here.
Well, give me 5 minutes.
Okay. And then anyone who wants the books, see me. They're $30 over there in that box.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.